Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first Droidcon Italy webinar. This is Lucy James speaking. I work with Synesthesia. I'm one of the organisers for Droidcon Italy. This is our first in a series of webinars, all focused on the topic of mobile development. And thank you very much for joining us today. These webinars are brought to you by Synesthesia, the software development house in Turin, and proudly powered by our sponsor, Bluetooth. Jorge is our presenter today. Hi, Jorge. He's spoken at Droidcon Italy quite a few times in the past, actually, and we are very glad to be working with him again. Thank you, Jorge.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. I hope that everybody can hear me well and see me well. I think this is the first time that I run an installation like this, so complex that I'm going to switch cameras and so on. I hope that it goes smoothly, but if it doesn't, just feel free to make any comment and I will try to solve it as soon as possible. Okay, so for today's session, I'm going to start with presentation, with a very short presentation to introduce the topics that I want to show you in the live coding. I promise that it's going to be very short. The big part of it is coding, so if you're here just for the coding, stay, it comes. And I will briefly introduce these topics and go into the code itself. The repo of the code is a public one. I will tell you in a moment. So you can repeat that later if you want to, and you can go through each of the steps that I did, okay? So let me go with the presentation, and let me put the presentation here. And well, a very brief introduction. Lucy did a great job at saying what I have done in the past. For a while, I've been a consultant and an instructor. I've been doing Android since the beta, and I was doing iOS since the first release of the SDK. And I wanted to learn more of this, and so I decided to quit my job and become a full-time developer for mobile platforms. But while doing this, I have had to work with teams that also had some back-end stuff. So I have been doing some of the stuff that I'm going to show you today also in Go, in Golang, and I'm trying very hard to learn Rust. So I'm still not there, but very close. I do trainings, and they're in the URL that you have on your screen. Feel free to reach me by Twitter, that you have my handle down there, or any other means. Okay. So let's go with the presentation, and this is going to be fast, as I said. The webinar today is going to be about how to take control of a code base that has been handed on to you. Now you have the responsibility to add some code to this code base. You have the responsibility to do it in a proper way. And sometimes the current state of the code base is not as good as you would like it to be. So what can you do? Well, these are the steps that I would recommend you to do in a case like that. But before I start with the technical part, I just want to make a very, very brief shout out to the people who has helped us to do this. I mean, like, it's a very hard moment for all the people around the world, and we have to be cautious, and we are safe because there's some people taking care of us. There's people taking care of us in hospitals, taking our picking our trash, bringing food to the supermarkets, and I'm really thankful for that, and I want to say it loud. Okay, let's go with the technical part then. And the technical part is going to be about these topics that I'm going to tell you. First, I will show you what is the code base that I was going to modify, and how I got to this code base, what I did as a code review. I will just show you the most relevant details. And then I will define an evolution. The evolution is not relevant here, but it's something that could be done to this code base. So you can, you will need a certain feature to be included, and you want to do it in a safe way. So in order to do that, you would like to introduce tests, but most likely, and that's why I chose this code base, is not going to be very easy. There are going to be some things that are can be improved in the code, and for doing that, we are going to make, in this case, a seam. We are going to find a place in the code where we can separate things, and we can add tests to the part that we care about the most, okay? So in order to use that seam, we are going to add some refactoring, and these automatic refactorings that I'm going to apply are going to keep safety while we introduce the test. Keep in mind that refactoring means changing the code without changing its functionality. But in this case, while the only way that we have to prove that the functionality is there is just by doing some things that are very, very safe, since we don't have any tests yet. And once we do that, then we will be able to introduce the tests, which is the main goal of all this refactoring thing. Okay, so before
Jorge, sorry to interrupt you. It's Lucy. We've currently got presenter view of your slides. If you wouldn't mind.
You cannot.
We've got the presenter view.
Oh, sorry about that. Let me go with the other. So yeah, I chose the wrong one. Let me go with this one. Sorry about that. Thank you, Lucy. I don't want to pretend that this is going to be improvised here. No way. I did my homework before getting to this part of the webinar, and I downloaded a few code bases. And what I'm going to show you here is the result of that. I had to review code. I was looking for some code that could be used in a way that was able to show you the concepts that I was trying to convey here. The code had a few requirements from my point of view. I wanted it to be Kotlin, at least most of it. In this case, it's all of it. I didn't want it to have a lot of tests because then that spoils the whole purpose of what I'm doing. And I was also interested in having something that was not trivial. I mean, I wanted a full-fledged app, but I didn't want to have something that was too complex, so I had to spend 20 minutes explaining the domain of that application. I didn't want that. I chose something that was pretty simple, but still complex and has a pretty long files. It has a good number of code lines, and I think that's going to be a very significant example. Well, when I downloaded that, I did the process that I'm going to summarize for you now. And I took some notes. I organized them in a way that I could take some of the steps out, so because they didn't mean a lot for the process. And what you're going to see here is just the director's cut. I mean, like, it's just a brief summary of the steps. Probably if you do this, it would take you a little bit longer. You would make some you would make some mistakes. You would probably have to go backwards when you do some changes. That happens. I mean, like, don't think that this is going to be very, very smooth and everything works fine at the first attempt that you do. The application that I chose was a Simple Notes Pro. This application is available at the Play Store, so you can download it in your device if you want to. It's also available at the F-Droid Store. I don't know if you are familiar with the F-Droid Store, but it's another store that you can download applications for. And this store can be used in order for you to download applications that share their code, that are open source. So that's why I try to go through many alternatives on this store, because then I knew that if the application was there, the source code was going to be available. So I got with this application, and I want to thank Tibor Caputa, who is the developer of this application, for sharing his code. And I want to make it clear, I mean, like, this is no criticism of the application. I think that the application does its job. That's the first step that you have to accomplish for any application. And as any other code, as the code that I write, as the code you probably write too, it has things that can be enhanced. And here I'm going to suggest some things that can be enhanced. Again, if you want to go and check this application, you can go to the F-Droid store. It will point you to the GitHub repository. And if you go to the commit ID that I gave you there in the slide, you will be able to see the same process, to follow the same process that I'm following you, that I'm following here, okay? So let me stop this. Let me go back to the other one, to the one that I was offering you before. So hopefully now it is right. And what I'm going to do here is show you how the application is organized when the first time you open it. So one of the things that I would like to show you is that it only has a big module, which is the COM Simple Mobile Tools Nodes Pro. And inside of that, it has some sub packages. So it has activities, it has adapters, it has databases, dialogues, etc. The main thing that I want you to notice here is that most of the code is organized around SDK objects. There are subclasses of the SDK objects. So it has activities, it has fragments, it has services. It also has interfaces, but I couldn't see that the interfaces were here being used to apply the dependency inversion principle. So they are separated in a different folder. Probably they have their purpose, but I didn't fully understand why it is organized like that. Then I want to show you some other code that you have here. So probably you could be curious. I was when I was trying to download this to inspect this code, that there's a databases folder here. There's a databases package, and there is the nodes database. If you go here to the nodes database, you will see very clearly that this is a room database, and take my word for it, it is not using any other architecture components from the Android SDK. So by that I mean view models or the navigation. No, it's only using the room database. So another thing that I would like to show you here is that in this nodes database, if I go and visit the node, then you will see that this is a plain data class, Pollo in the Java meaning, and this data class offers only a little bit of functionality, so it's mostly data. It doesn't have any business logic in the data class. Okay. Another thing that I would like to show to you here is how things are organized. And probably our best candidate here is to visit the main activity. And the main activity, well, is pretty long, I would say, 1,000 something lines, okay? So one way to go around it and don't spend 5 hours visiting this is to try to see the structure of this file and go through all the methods. So you have Command F12, and here what I'm going to do is go to a method that is usually very telling. That is on options, item selected, menu item. Okay, why do I go there? Because this is where the user taps on the button and they get the functionality, like adding a note, anything like that. Let me show you the application here and you will see what I mean. So this is the application, and this is the application running, and it has a swipe area here so that allows you to change from one node to another. And you can type the content here, you can edit it, and this menu is the one that I was mentioning. So you can do plenty of things here. So you can add a new node, you can rename a node. So all the things that are more or less related to this domain logic. Okay, so let me go back to the code. Let me try to go back here. And here you can see that it has a method for each of these different items that you have in the menu. I'm going to visit one that I think is more telling, which is this share text. And as you can see here, there are a few things happening here. First, it does know about things that have to happen at the level of a node. So in some way is breaking the encapsulation of the object-oriented programming. Okay, the other thing is that it also does some display. So it prints a toast here and takes care of displaying some information to the user. Not only that, in the same method, it also takes care of navigation, okay? So at the level of the activity, everything is more or less happening there. And that's something that is very, very hard to test because I mean, we have to do a lot of mocking and assume that everything has an effect. Change every test that you write is going to be very, very easy to break. So you don't want that. What we would like to have is some logic that is somewhere else, that is happening in some other places. If I show you now a different method, if I show you now the refresh one, this one here has an instance, well, it's using it as a singleton, but it's using the nodes helper. And the nodes helper is something that is being used as like the repository of the domain logic. Not exactly, but more or less. So that looks like an excellent candidate for starting the test. Let's see what happens there. So here I go and do Command B and visit this nodes helper. And again, let me show you what the methods are here. And you will see that you have some methods. So you have get node ID with path, get nodes, get node with ID, insert or update node. So it has like every method that the author of this code has considered is relevant at the level of a node. However, there are some of the methods here that are used in the activity. I will show you later if needed, but take my word for it. In this case, we're going to try to address the testing of these get nodes, like the first method that we have here. And although it seems very simple, it is not. It is not because these get nodes, the object, the context helper, has a dependency on the context. I didn't show you that, but there are 2 extensions here and 3 extensions, and they are used, at least the first 2, to do some kind of dependency injection in the code. So it gets the context, in this case, in order to get access to the data access object, which is nodes.db. Okay, this is the object that your code, this code, is using to create node, to create a node, to remove a node, to modify a node. Okay, so all the business logic of your application. And notice that it is not explicit, the dependency here. You have the context, and you assume that a context is going to have that, which is not the case in any other application. Not only that, it also has a asynchronous code. So that's very nice, I mean, from the perspective of the user experience, but from the perspective of the code that we want to test, it makes things much harder. So we would like to simplify that and make code synchronous. And well, I mean, as I said, you would like to probably do the testing of this code in a way that is useful to you, but without the asynchronous part and without the implicit dependencies. That's what we are going to try to solve by refactoring. Okay. Okay, so again, let me go back to the presentation. I hope that I do it properly now. And well, this is the code review that I was mentioning, and these are the main notes that I took from the code review. The code is organized in packages by Android role. As I said, there are no other Android components other than Room that is used for the database. The entities are mostly shells for data, no functionality. And node helpers is nice, it's like a good entry point for us, but not all the business logic is there. For example, if you have some time later to inspect the code, you will notice that, for example, the deletion of nodes is not happening there, it's happening in the activity, okay? And well, as I said, most of the logic is at least coordinated from the Android layer, from activities or fragments. That's what we would like to change. But coming back to my story, let's say that now you have been hired by this company and you have to take control of the application, and they have asked you to evolve the application. So how do you do that? Well, first you have to take into account what is the evolution they are asking me to do. In this case, I've invented one. It could be any other, but let's assume that we want to add dates to each of the nodes. I want to know if a node has been taken yesterday or 3 weeks ago. So in the pager, maybe I'm going to display not only the title, but also a small piece of data, which is going to be the date of that node. How do we go about that? How do we change the code in the way we do want it? Well, here you have two views. You have the long term, the mid-term at least, the strategic view, and then the tactics. Let me start with the strategic, and then we will go with the tactics. In the nice feature that you want to be, probably is going to be an application that has layer separation, so the views only take care of displaying things and taking events from the user. There are view models or presenters if you fancy them better, and there will be a model that is business logic that can be reused and has no relationship whatsoever with the Android SDK. You would be using some kind of dependency injection. Let's say that is Kotlin, or maybe Dagger if you want to suffer. And also you will be able to do changes in the business logic, like the one that I was mentioning, adding dates, and then reuse them anywhere else in the application, which is what you want in a good application. Okay, but that's like dreaming. We are far from there. I mean, like that's a long way from the code that we have. How do we improve that in the short term? Well, in the short terms, I would like to do some refactoring, and I would like to introduce changes in a way that doesn't break the code that I already have. How do I do that? Well, as I said, the problem that we have is that the code that we want to test, it uses the context, it uses the NodeDB as a singleton, more or less, and we would like to solve this. We will have to reorganize code, refactor, so it does the same. It doesn't break anything that we already have, but allows us to test better. And once we have this test, then we will be able to introduce the feature, and then we will know for sure, because we are testing, that it doesn't affect any other part of the business logic. Okay? Before I continue with the code, let me recommend you a pair of books, because usually when I do trainings about this stuff, people ask me, so how do you learn more about this? Well, usually people leave this for the end, but just in case, I'm going to recommend you two good books. I think they're very interesting. I have no affiliation with the authors or the publishers of the book, so feel free to buy them or not. I yes have met once Michael Feathers, very nice person, but other than that, I have no relationship with any of them. The first book is Michael Feathers, and he's working effectively with legacy code, and it provides you with a lot of techniques and insights on how to take control of the code and how to change it in a proper way without affecting what you have and make it more maintainable, which is a goal for most of us. Okay. The other one is a catalog of refactoring, sorry, and it has a lot of them by name, so you know the functionality, you know the state before and after, and the motivations that will take you to do some change, to some refactor of the code from one thing to another, and how this has to be done so the code changes are safe. And well, I would recommend it as a reference book. I have a copy, and I usually consult it when I don't know how to approach a problem. Maybe how do I do this refactoring if the tool is not helping me with it? Well, in any case, if you don't want to take any of these books, I would like to remind you something that I consider that is very, very interesting for this case, which is you always have other tools that are going to help you. And Git is one of them. Git is a tool that you should be using when you are changing code. This is like the basics for a developer. If you don't know Git well enough, you should. So through the rest of the explanation, which is now coding, I recommend you to think when you would have done a commit. if at all. Probably many times. Okay, so think about it. And if you want to talk about it after the webinar, I'm glad to comment on that. Okay, so let's do the changes in the code. And in order to do that, we're going to start by introducing this sim to separate code in a way that we can control, to take away the dependencies in a way that don't bother us. So what do we do here? We're going to use a technique that is introduced in the book that I mentioned first, Michael Feathers, which is the Sprout class. So the Sprout class technique is a very simple one. You have a class which is very difficult to test because it has a lot of dependencies. Creating all of them is very complex. In this case, as you know, if you want to make a mock of context, probably your best way to go would be to use Roboelectric. And I don't want to do that for business logic tests. So, well, I would like to get rid of the dependencies. So how do I do that? I create another class. I move the part of the business logic that doesn't have this dependency into this new class, and then I test this new class. Obviously, I'm going to call this class from the other one to replace that part of the functionality. That's it, nothing else. So instead of talking, let's do it. Okay, let me go back to the code part. And here, what I'm going to do is, well, let's assume that I'm running this every time, but for the sake of the length of this session, I'm going to keep it short, and I'm not going to compile and run as often as I should, okay? Let's just assume that I'm running it and I'm verifying that at least I'm not making any important change. So this is the notes helper that I was mentioning before. And this is the code, the code that is inside of the async part, the one that I want to test. Particularly is basically from line 16 here to line 38, okay? So the first thing that I would like to do is to make the dependencies that are in the code explicit. How do I do that? Well, let's go on. Let's expect the code line by line. The first one that I find here is this one here, is the context.config.uprun. It's injecting this data, which probably could be some parameter of the get nodes, but it is not there. So it is an implicit dependency. Let's make it explicit. And in order to at least move it in a way, move it to a place that we see where the dependency is coming, I'm going to refactor this. I'm going to use the IDE. I'm going to use the tools that the IDE provides me with, and I'm going to extract a variable. So this variable is going to be in this context that is now blue, and is going to be called uprun_count, exactly as the IDE suggests. So, well, much better. Now, I'm pretty sure that you are convinced that I haven't done any change that affects the way my code runs, because I have just moved this piece of code into a variable that appears in the line before. So, yes, these two lines are the only ones that are changing in the code. Same thing here. I'm going to do it for the context nodes DB, which is the data access object that I was mentioning before, that is injected through the context. So how do I do that? Again, Control-T, and I'm going to extract this as a variable. And it says whether I want to do to replace the 4 currencies. Yes, please, I want to replace the 4 currencies. And here, I'm going to define this nodes DB here. It says I could declare it as a variable. That's not what I want. I mean, a constant is good enough. And do I want to make the explicit type? Well, I can do that. And it's going to be okay. So that's it. I'm going here and I confirm the name, and this is the nodes DAO. Perfect. So as you can see here now in the code, I have no mention to the context. And if you inspect the rest of the code, it looks like there's no other dependency. However, the IDE is betraying us this time, because if you go here to the general node and you click on it, you notice that there's also a dependency on the resources bundle. I don't want that. I just want to make that explicit, and I want to take it also again out. I could do the same thing with the variable, but I think in this case it's easier to just move this variable to the outer scope. So I'm going to cut it from here, and I'm going to put it here. That's it. That's everything I wanted to do regarding reorganizing the code in a way that doesn't have the dependencies implicit there, okay? Okay, now the next thing that I would like to do is to create this Sprout class that I mentioned before. So in the same place that I have the nodes helper, which is in the helpers folder, I'm going to create a new class. And this class obviously is going to be a Kotlin one, and is going to be called nodes repo. Repo. Okay, so this is a repository of nodes, and it's going to do all the business logic applications of our nodes. Straight enough. So now we add this to Git, and obviously we're going to create this class nodes repo here. And what do we do with this class? Well, the thing that I would like to do is to move the part of the business logic that we had in the helper to this nodes repo. So before I do that, I'm going to select the functionality that is being done here, and I'm going to use again another extraction from the ID. I'm going to extract a method, and I'm going to call it getNodes exactly as it was called before. No nodes. This is just being a little bit picky, but I prefer to have the nodesDB as the first parameter, and that's it. So I have this private method here that does the same logic. So I have reorganized the code in a way that is easier to understand. Now I want to move this method that, as you can see here, has no dependencies on any other things that are not the parameters that get through the call to the method. I would like to be able to test that. So in order to do that, I'm going to copy this code, plain copy. I mean, like no tool, no fancy tool here. I'm going to copy this tool, and I'm going to move this to the nodes repo. Okay, it tells me if I want to import those. Yes, I want to import them. And what I would like to do now is to have this nodes repo as an instance variable, a member of this class. So I'm going to call this private val nodes repo. And so I don't need that as a parameter of the get nodes. The reason why I do that is because nodesDB is the data access object, and I'm going to use this through all the methods of my nodes repo. So I better start there. Yes, and finally, I would like to have the parameters in one line because I think it's more readable for you at home. And this is the method that I would like to test. Pretty easy. In order to be sure that I'm doing this properly, I would like to do the change here. And the change that I'm going to do is, well, first I'm going to duplicate this line. And here I'm going to use the method rather than the local private method that I have here. So I'm going to create an instance, and that instance is going to be here in the nodes helper. So I'm going to say private val nodes repo, which I'm going to instantiate at the beginning. Later on, I will have to inject this. So this nodes repo is going to take a nodesDB, and in order to get the nodesDB, the only thing that I have to do is use the variable that I have. So notice that I'm not changing anything. I'm just moving things around, okay? But in a way that now I can use this instance of nodes repo, and I can invoke the get. Well, I think I left it private, so let me make it public, obviously, otherwise I'm not going to be able to call it. So I'm going back here, get nodes, and what I need to do here is to pass the two variables, the app run count and the general node. Perfect. So I can now get rid of this line and this line, and if I compile and run my application, I will be getting exactly the same results as before. As I said, I have just reorganized the code, but by having this Sprout class here, I have something that is far more testable. Okay, so let's test it. Let's go to the nodes repo, and let's create a new test class. So I do Command Shift T, and it asks me, are you sure? Do you want to create a new test? Yes, I do want to create a new test. And notice here, I'm going to use JUnit 5. It says JUnit 5 library is not found. So fix it. Let's start by fixing it, okay? I'm going to do the fixing. It's going to complain because it doesn't know how to do this properly. And what I'm going to do is cancel this for a second, go to the structure of the project, and here in the dependencies, I'm going to change a little bit the app dependency, because as you can notice here, Jupyter has no version number, and that doesn't like it. So let me get rid of one of the instances. I probably clicked twice, or the IDE did something wrong. And the other thing that I want to do is to choose the latest version of JUnit 5. Okay, so that is more or less what we wanted, because I don't want to go back later and change and add some dependencies here. I'm going to add Mockito Kotlin here. So I'm going to use com and what is AARM dot Mockito Kotlin 2. With this, I should be able to find Mockito Kotlin, and what I'm going to do is to add this one in the latest version. That should be it. Now Gradle is syncing, and hopefully everything is ready to do testing. What I'm going to do is to create a test. I create a new test. The test is going to be called nodes repo test, and it's JUnit 5 as I wanted. So okay, I'm going to put it in the Java one, not in the Android test, in the test one, because I don't want this to be neither instrumented test nor Roboelectric. So there, in the easiest part of the code. Well, I can add this to Git, and what I'm going to do is to verify that my tests are going to run. How do I do this? I create a dummy test, which I'm going to call test enable. And by just creating this new test, it adds this body which says, hey, you have to do something here. But for the purpose of this, I think I can go with that, and I can run this. Let me try to run this. In this case, I need to run it. So here I run the test, and obviously it's not going to pass because the to-do is going to stop anything from passing. And that's what I want to see. I want to see that a test is able to run and is so able to fail. Hopefully, not test found. Really? Okay, it doesn't pass. And if I remove this and I rerun this, then I will see that the test passed because there's nothing that breaks the test. Okay, so now what we are going to do is to create an actual test, one that we can use to test the class that we have there. So in the class that we have there, we're going to create a new test, and we are going to call this get nodes returns nodes from the data access object. Okay, pretty simple. What? Let me try again. Sorry about that. JUnit 5 get nodes returns nodes from DAO. Okay, here we go. So let me remove this part here. Let me choose a display name that is a little bit nicer. So display name, and I'm going to use the other one, but this is just for making it nicer. So what I'm going to do is get nodes returns nodes from the data access object. Okay, so as you know, every test has like 3 parts, and this is what we are going to implement here. So it has an arrange part, it has an act part, and it has an assert part. Let's go step by step, and let's try to test the nodes repo that we have. So we are going to create here a val that is going to be called suit. This is the system under test. In our case, is the nodes repo. And this is going to be type nodes repo. And we are going to create an instance. But when we create an instance, you will see that, oh, I need to have an instance of the data access object. So let's mock it. And that's why it's so cool, because now I can mock something and do the test. So now I can create a mock, well, DAO mock, and I'm going to make this, sorry, I'm going to make this nodes data access object type, and I'm going to create an instance by using the Mockito method. So far, so good. I have a DAO mock. DAO. Let's just call it mock DAO. I don't like DAO mock, sorry. DAO, much better. So here, I'm going to use this mock DAO as the parameter that I need to create a system under test. The thing that we are going to run is we're going to create a list of nodes that we have retrieved from the get nodes. And obviously, this is going to be the same thing that comes from the data access object. Let me show you the logic that happens here. So in the get nodes, there are 4 things that are happening. The first one, I think it doesn't make a lot of sense, which is it runs it waits for a second, for 200 milliseconds, if it is the first time that the app is created. It gets nodes, but it waits after that. I think that RoboElectric takes care of that. Sorry, RoboElectric, Room takes care of that. So I don't think that makes a lot of sense, but let's call it wait, okay? The second thing that it does is it obtains the data from the DAO. Then it goes, and since data can be both in files and in the data, in the Room database, it goes and tries to find which of the nodes that should be in a file. We have lost track of them, that there is no file anymore. So the leads lost nodes, okay? And finally, if there's no node at all after that process, it creates a new standard node. None exists. Okay, so this is basically what we are doing. I'm going to run this, and the first test that I would like to do is just to test this in a way that we can create this code and that we are going to create the nodes immediately. And we are not going to try to delete anything. I have codes for that, but I would be running out of time. I'm a little bit tight. And obviously, this could also be tested later, okay? But in this case, what I'm going to check is that what I put in, what I get from the data access object is exactly what I return. So the actual nodes that I'm going to obtain, nodes are going to be the result of running the method of the suit that is called getNodes. And in this case, I'm going to run an up run count of 2. It could be any number. I just don't want to make it 0 or 1 or anything less than 0, because then it would wait for the 200 milliseconds, and then that would make my test slower. I don't want that, and I don't think it provides any additional value. So that's what I'm making it to. And as for the name of the general node, same thing. I don't need anything for this purpose because I'm not creating a new node, so I make it the empty string. What I would like to do here is to compare it, but to compare it with what? I have to deal with the mock, and I have to create, to use the mock as an stub. So when I ask it to do something, it will return whatever I want it to. So what I'm doing here is I use whenever, and I use the invocation of the mock DAO that has the get nodes, that is the one that we are expecting. And here, notice that this invocation comes exactly from this code here. This is what I want, what I'm saying. When you get this invocation, I want you to reply with what I'm going to tell you now. So the then return here is going to provide a list of expected nodes. So let's create this list here first. Sorry. Let's create this list here first, expected nodes. And this is going to be an array list of what? Well, an array list of nodes. So I'm going to create a first node. That is, I'm going to import it, obviously, to make this work. And it needs an ID, it needs a title, and it needs some content. And it needs the type, which is node type text value. I don't like this notation either, but this is the way it is written. Okay, so now I duplicate this one, I put a comma here, and another title, and the rest doesn't matter. Finally, in order to pass the test, well, I'm going to pass these when I get asked, expected nodes. And what I expect to happen is that the result of invoking the system under test, our nodes repo, with the get nodes method is exactly what is provided by the DAO. So expected nodes needs to be equal to actual nodes. And unless I have made any mistakes, this should run and pass. Well, I can do, I think it was going to be a little bit more complicated. I just read a comment in the chat, which is very appropriate, fluent assertions, and I'm all for this, but in this case, I wanted to go for things that the maximum number of people could know and don't complicate it at all. So if you want, I can continue later and do another test, but let me finish with, well, as you can see here, this test is passing. This is verifying that the functionality that we have moved here, at least some part of it is running properly. The next test that I would have to do is, well, what happens if I want to verify that there are some nodes that have a file that is missing? Does it remove them from the code? And hopefully it does. And how do I test that? Because it has a dependency on the file class. If you want, we can stay and do that. But let's assume that I have done all the tests. Now I could run, I can add this functionality and the thing would be testable. The things that we are adding, we will be able to test that they are not breaking the previously existing business logic code. And not only that, also that we will be able to test before we deliver the new functionality that we have added onto the code. So just to finish with the presentation, I hope that by now you see that there's some hope for us that we can change code in a way that is trustable, that we can trust the changes that we add in a way that is not very hard, that we can introduce some changes and get to this code to make this code easier to test. And not only that, this catalog of refactorings that is available in that book and in some other sources, there are web pages, there are some other sources that you can use to see some other refactorings. And not only that, you also have the IDE that offers you some. I mean, that doesn't help you very much with moving a function from one class to another in this case, but it did all the things with the variables, extracting the variables and so on, which is very helpful. If you think that that's helpful, then you can then introduce the test, which is, I think, is the most important part, but something that we couldn't have done unless we have refactored the code. Keep in mind that once you have introduced the test, you also should refactor your code in a way. For example, here, let me show you that. This part of the code here is not very functional. If you are a little bit into functional code, you know that you can write this very much shorter. So probably you would be applying a filter and a map, and that would be it. And yes, I think you should do that. You can rewrite the code, you can refactor these changes. Not only that, if you do things in the code of the test, you should also take care of refactoring the test in a way that is the quality of your test is as good as the quality of your code, or the code that you send to production. So let me finish with this. I hope this has been useful. I have a few more examples. I have no problem in staying and do them here, but I just didn't want to go beyond the timeline that I had. So feel free to ask. This is my Twitter handle. If you want anything from me, just send me a tweet. And this is the URL of where I am mostly based. And now, Lucy.
Thank you. Thank you, Jorge. And Jorge is going to take questions in about 3 seconds. I just wanted to once again thank our sponsor, Bluetooth, and also to let you all know that our next webinar will be Tuesday, the 21st of April at 11 a.m. There'll be details of that right here and on our website. So we hope to see you there. Back to you, Jorge, for the questions, and thank you again.